Hello, welcome to the YouTube channel of the Local Matters podcast of Georgia. We are here to ensure that you are a more engaged citizen and a more confident voter. Today's episode is the first in an occasional series related to public education. We are calling this a discussion on whether kids are failing school or whether schools are failing our kids. Our speaker today, or our guest today, is Dr. Phillip A. Williams. He is a long-term resident of the Augusta area, and he is going to share a lifetime of thoughts with us about public education and what we can do to improve it. If you have not subscribed here on YouTube, please do so that you are notified whenever we drop a new video. And if you're on the Facebook platform, please go there, look for Local Matters Podcast of Georgia, and follow us so that you are notified every week when we drop a new audio episode. Thanks so much for your interest in Local Matters and for your interest in what can be done to improve our communities throughout the United States. Local Matters family, our very first guest of 2023 is Dr. Phillip A. Williams.
My name is Phil Williams. Just a brief background. I grew up in Athens, Georgia, pretty much. My father was one of the deans at the University of Georgia. And when I finished my undergraduate work, I went to the Medical College of South Carolina. And my master's work was in clinical microbiology and immunology. And I came back after that to the Medical College of Georgia and did my doctoral work in microbiology and immunology. I worked for just a couple of years elsewhere and got a call one morning to come back to Augusta and join a clinical pathology practice here. And I did that and worked there for almost 40 years. And if people are not familiar with what the clinical laboratory does, we're the ones who do the blood tests and the autopsies, and we try to figure out what's wrong with you if your primary physician can't quite get it figured out. So that's what we did, and along the line we've had a great deal of life experience in education, primarily because that's the way I was brought up. And so that's just a brief bit of the background. I've been involved in some community service stuff. I was a trustee for the library for several years, and I've been on a couple of national boards and quite a few local boards like the Boy Scouts and such as that. So I've been working actually for about the last 10 years in the Harrisburg area, working with other folks to try and bootstrap the area, work with the Salvation Army on the homelessness issue and the building of a new shelter to help those folks out. So I have a real interest in the future of Augusta. I've raised a couple of young'uns to adulthood and now have 4 grandchildren. And of course, I'm interested in their education too. And I think I'd like to do like a mentor of mine once did. He said, I'm going to tell you my story because it's really the only one I know, and it will inform you as to why I have come to some of the conclusions that I have. And so I'm going to try and do that very quickly and then launch into some of the ideas that Ms. Jackson would like to explore. First of all, I am pushing close to 80 years old. I know I look young and handsome and not beyond 39, but I've got you fooled. So I came up a long time ago And in fact, I came up in the pre-kindergarten area. At the time that I came along, my father was floating around on an aircraft carrier in the Pacific, and he got some leave, and that's when I came along. And but when I got to kindergarten age, since he was in education, he saw to it that I went to a kindergarten. It was a private kindergarten, and I still remember the activities that we had. And I'm proud to tell you, I was the assistant fire chief. We had a little piece of hose and a little red wagon. And when Ms. Weber, I still remember her name, would ring her little bell on the desk, we would run out, pull the wagon out, and pretend to put out the fire that was painted on some paper. And obviously that was private school because there were no kindergartens at that time. After kindergarten, I attended for about 3 months a first grade in Lexington, Kentucky. And then my dad got an invitation to come back to the University of Georgia. And so we moved to Athens. Well, we went to the west side of Athens, which at the time was definitely blue collar, because my dad was just out of school, and my brother and I didn't realize it, but we were poor. Back then, teachers didn't make anything, and but we had a grand time. And I went to this school for about 3 months, and then my dad got a promotion and was the assistant to the president, Adderholt, as a matter of fact. And we moved to the Five Points area. And I didn't realize that there was really any difference there, except that I didn't see any of my old friends that I'd made in first grade. This is the third first grade I'd gone to. And I later discovered that the Five Points area was where most of the middle class was. And it was professors and doctors and lawyers and that sort of stuff. And again, it didn't dawn on me at that age that that was any different than any other place. It was just, that was my limited experience. When I got out of elementary school there, and actually that was the 7th grade, the high school, the Athens High School was 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. When I went to the 8th grade at the high school, I saw all my old friends from the first grade school I'd gone to, plus a lot of other people that I'd never seen before, and who were very obviously wearing clothes that weren't new, were wearing shoes that didn't look like mine, and they behaved in ways that I couldn't fathom, because there was one high school for the whole county, and all of a sudden now I am beginning to see that there's more than one culture around. And I can remember going to my mother about 3 or 4 weeks in and complaining to my mother. I said, my vocabulary is going downhill. I said, I can see it myself. I've been here for a month or a month and a half, and I'm starting to talk like these people. Well, I understand why now. You become what you're around. And that was happening to me, but I didn't understand why at the time. Well, what are the reasons for that? And I use that specific example to illustrate a lot that you could use for examples there. But what are the reasons for that? Income disparity is the one that most of us are aware of. Where I lived, the parents, and it was typically a single parent earning a living, and the mothers were what were referred to as housewives at the time. I think that may be a verboten word nowadays, but that's the way it was when I grew up. The other explanation was, and is probably the reason for the first, is that there were differences in the education level of the parents. All you had to do was take a look at the income level and then take a look at the education level of the parents. And it was obvious that that was an outstanding difference. Now, here's something that people need to latch on to. That was one school, Athens High School, and it was segregated at the time. There was nobody in that school but white people. The Black people went to Athens High and Industrial School. But the point I want to make is that the physical support for everybody at Athens High School was the same. Didn't matter how rich or poor you were. You had the same teachers. You were in a mixed class. You had the same books, and you ate the same lunch as everybody else. And the teacher quality was absolutely identical because we all had the same teachers. And that's something that people need to wrap their heads around. Too many people, I think, feel like that it's a racial issue. And I absolutely reject that. I absolutely reject that as a cause for the issues that the schools have. Just based on my own experience and the fact that there were lots of white kids in our school who didn't do well at all. And it was not difficult to spot who they were. These were the poor kids. These were the kids who had divorced parents. These were the kids whose parents did not have an education and who did not value education. A lot of people today, and you hear this constantly, these kids are failing because their parents are not involved. Well, like the kids say, duh, you know, it's just so obvious that children who do not have engaged parents are not going to do nearly as well as ones who do. And let me suggest this. If there's absolutely no reason to believe that just because people are poor, that they don't care about education. There are always notable exceptions here. But the vast majority of people are poor because they do not value an education. Poverty does not create a dislike for education. It's the failure of education that creates the poverty. It's the other way around. So you can't blame it on that. Educational success is dependent on the dedicated involvement of a knowledgeable parent, and even a single knowledgeable parent will get the job done. The issue that I see in so many of the schools that have failing metrics is that children do not have parents, plural. Many of these children have a single mother who may be working more than a job. She may not have a job. She may be working 3 jobs, or they're being raised by a grandmother, or they're being raised by an aunt. And these people typically do not have an education either. And so what we've got here is a vicious cycle. We have somebody who may very well want to help that child succeed, but they can't do it because they don't have the education. They don't know how to help. They don't have the time to do it. They are working themselves to death just to be able to feed that child in so many cases. So while failure to have involved parents is indeed a substantial reason for the failures that we've got, I don't think it's appropriate for us to try and lay blame. That does nobody any good. We know what the problem is, but laying blame is just, I don't know, it's an emotional kind of a thing. If we know what the problems are, let's ask ourselves, what can we do to resolve this issue? And I have a few thoughts, and I've run this by some other folks. And I will be brave enough to throw this out there, and anybody who wants to throw tomatoes, they're more than welcome. But I have thought this through, and I have discussed this with some other educators, and they agree that the solutions would probably work. The only disagreement comes with who's going to pay for it and how you're going to do it. And then, of course, it becomes a political issue. Well, let me continue with the discussion about the effect of poverty on education. Just as a statistical fact, over 23% of the people in Richmond County live below the poverty line. 23%. That's like 1 out of 4 people live below the poverty line in Richmond County. And I'll say it again, poverty is a reflection of educational failure. Poverty begets poverty, and it has become generational. And if I had to pick a date, I'm going to pick about 1960 to 1970 is a time when this started to become a real issue. And I'll make some people angry with this too, but I honestly believe it. Poverty supports culture that accepts and even endorses violence and crime as a way of life. That's not to say that everybody's poor engages in that culture, but too many do. I think all you have to do is go down and speak to Sheriff Roundtree, and he'll be more than happy to tell you about his experiences every single day of the week. So how do we remedy these problems? How do we do it? You can't do it immediately. It's got to be done in time. This next idea that I'm going to throw out there is one that was given to me by at least 2 other professional educators. And for some people, this is going to be shocking. They say, cut the cord, stop taking and dealing with Title I, which is the huge federal subsidy to education that comes with so many strings attached to it that the school systems, starting at the state level on down, basically have their hands tied because of all of the stipulations that go with the federal handout with Title I. Between 2000 and 2019, the number of students in Georgia grew by approximately 8%. The number of teachers grew by approximately 9%. And the number of district administrators grew by 88%. 88%. 10 times more administrative growth than student growth. What's wrong with this picture? We have a situation where in these, and I'll admit I have not completely investigated the ins and outs of all Title I. I know it's probably beyond virtually anybody. It's so massive. But at least according to these 2 professional educators, this is the problem. They are so hamstrung by administrative mandates from the federal government down through the state government that they can't teach. How many kids got an excellent education in a 1-room schoolhouse? How many kids get an excellent education by knowledgeable homeschooling parents? A lot. You don't have to have $1 million classroom. You don't have to have, you've got to have a motivated teacher, and God knows all of them are pretty much motivated. They wouldn't be in that job. Lord knows it would get me crazy. I've taught at the high school level and a little bit at the graduate level, and I just do not have what it takes to to deal with little kids. It takes special people. And so God bless them. So I don't think there's any question that teachers are motivated and great folks, but they can't do everything. They are having to provide services. They are attempting to acculturate these children. In the past, the parents did that. The parents taught them right from wrong. The parents taught them the need for education and the love of knowledge and how important that is. The kids that are failing in our schools, and which reflects on our schools and makes our schools fail. The schools aren't failing per se. The kids are failing the school. If a child doesn't want to be educated, you're not going to educate him. It just doesn't work. In my day, if you didn't want to be educated, you got introduced to Mr. Paddle, and that would temporarily fix the issue. But it was something that was done by my parents. After I got whacked with a paddle, I got sent home, and then I really got a talking to. But the schools are going to have to take a different tact because they continue to depend on parents to provide this acculturation, and it's obviously not working. So how do you do that? Well, I'm going to suggest that if the school boards had the freedom to do it, and I was the king, I would say school is going to start at 8 a.m. and we'll be here till 5 o'clock. And we are going to start including all these sections of education that they're not getting at home. Somebody's going to have to create that curriculum. And that's going to be a political issue too, of course. So it's not going to be easy. But the school is basically going to have to start taking the place of the absentee parent if you want to get rid of this issue. And you're going to have to start early. We've got pre-K now. I'm going to suggest to you that starting at 3 years old is probably not too soon for some sort of a play school. And I know of at least one private school in Augusta that is moving in that direction. And the principal tells me that at some point, they may start taking them younger than that. So that it is almost almost cradle to 8th grade education process. They're not there yet. And I'm going to hear it now. People's going to say, well, yeah, those rich folks, they can afford anything they want. That's nice for them. What about the rest of us? Well, I'm going to tell you that this particular school, and I'm not going to call the name because I don't have that permission to do that. Over 90% of the kids in that school are Black. Over 95% of the kids in that school are from East Augusta. And if you ever want to see success in a school, call me and I will arrange for you to go down there and see it. I worked with them in a STEM project for a while, and it's just absolutely amazing what those kids can do in spite of where they come from, in spite of the poverty. It's all in the approach. Now, the school, I will grant you, requires that the parents participate. A lot of them can't do that during the week. Well, they make arrangements. You can come in there on the weekend and you can push a broom and you can help clean up and you can serve at the parent teachers thing and you can come and talk to the teacher even if it's on the weekend. So they insist on parent involvement, even if it's a single parent, even if it's Aunt Lily who's doing it, or grandma. But I'm telling you, it can be done. And it's all in the culture, the teaching kids an appreciation for the value of an education so that they break out of this revolving door of ignorance and poverty that just goes round and round and round. Now, with that, I'll hush for a minute. There's a lot in there to digest, and I have not covered all your topics there, Ms. Jackson, but do you have a question that you'd like me to try and expound on a little bit?
It seems like what you're proposing, I just kind of want to put it in a nutshell. What you're discussing is essentially some fundamental changes in how we go about educating kids.
Absolutely. It's going to require a sea change, an absolute sea change in approach. You've heard this quip, stupidity is doing the same thing over and over and over and expecting different results. Well, guess what? Not much is changing. Let me just read you a few statistics. Earlier, we were talking about which schools are better than others. And my initial thought when you start talking about good versus bad and better and, comparative value of things is that's awfully nuanced. But let's just take a look at some hard statistics. CSI schools are schools that are designated by the state as needing remediation because the students are not doing well. They are graduating at a rate of less than 67%, or they are in the bottom 5% of the state schools. Now, in Richmond County, we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 schools that are CSI schools. Now, that's the state's evaluation.
And CSI stands for what?
Honestly, I cannot remember.
Okay, okay.
But it's a designation. Some of these educational designations just go right by me. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 others that are right behind them. But the point is that these schools are failing, for want of a better term. And I'm not casting aspersions by using that term. It's a fact. You talk to some of the folks on the Board of Education, they'll tell you exactly the same thing. They might not want to say it in public, but they'll certainly say it privately. Yeah, there's no questions that some of these schools, many of them are failing. And all you have to do is take a look at the poverty level of the students in those schools, and it's almost a one-to-one comparison. There's no question.
Yes, I looked it up while we were talking. Comprehensive support and improvement schools.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Which is not terrible. Well, it's a euphemistic way of saying they really need help. They really need help. And that's just to say, yes, there are issues here in Richmond County. I don't think it's because of the teachers. It's not necessarily because of the administrators. I think that poverty is the issue. And as long as kids are acculturated in a neighborhood that is surrounded in poverty, where they see crime every single day, and people just turn a blind eye to it, and where the values of the students that are taught to them, children become what they're around. In one of my advocations, I was very competitive back in the day, and I didn't make the Olympic team, but I was good enough to make the invitation to the Olympic trials. And for 3 or 4 years, every year we would go to the Olympic Training Center for a couple of weeks. And the folks in the sports medicine place would really work on us to try and improve us. And that included the psychologist. Sports psychology is a huge thing at an upper level like that. And they hammered it into us that you become what you are around. If you want to be a champion, you associate with champions. You want to be a loser, hang out with the losers. Life is the same way. You know, if you want to run the streets and live rough like that, hang out with folks like that, and that's where you end up. If you want to be a productive individual, if you want to be an electrician, you want to be a plumber, you want to be a doctor, you want to be a welder, hang out with people who want to succeed, who want to contribute to this society, and you'll be a whole lot better off. Kids don't know that. They're not taught that. They're not taught gold building, and they don't realize what's happening around them. They just grow up with this culture around them, and they absorb it and they become it. And it's not their fault. And if we are going to change that, then we're the ones that are going to have to do it. And the best way I know to do it is through the schools. And until the schools are given the freedom to do that, they're not going to succeed. And that's the reason. If people feel like that private schools do better than public schools, I don't think that's a fair comparison right there. I think all you have to do is look at charter schools. Look at charter schools. Augusta, Georgia has got charter schools that are nationally recognized in the top 5. My goodness, we've got talented young people in Augusta who are setting the world on fire because they want an education, because they want to learn, they want to be successful, and they make it to the charter schools, and the charter schools have expectations that are up here instead of down here. And so they succeed. One of the principals I talked to quoted an educator, and she told me, she said, we need to get away from the soft bigotry of low expectations. We need to get away from the soft bigotry of low expectations. People rise to the occasion. You challenge a child, give him the leadership he needs and show him the way. And oftentimes you're going to get exactly what you want. But if you don't expect anything, guess what? That's what you're going to get too. So sea change is what we need. We need people to be honest. I'm going to praise some folks on the Board of Education for speaking up. And I'm going to give some others a D, possibly even a failing grade. There is a terrible, terrible tendency among leaders, and this is in business and it's in education. When something is wrong, they don't want to talk about it because they feel like it reflects on them. Let me tell you what, that's the worst thing in the world to do. You have got to open up and talk about this and say, look, we have got a problem, people. We need to solve this. We need help. Do you have ideas? What can we do to resolve this matter? And speak openly about it. Admit it and say we want to change. We're not getting that from some folks because they haven't yet come to the conclusion that that's the way to do it. We've got a few, and I think you know who I'm talking about, that will stand up and will speak strongly about, we've got problems, people. Let's address them. Let's meet it face on. It's like a cancer. I come from a medical background, so let me use this. We've got a cancer. Guess what? The best way in the world to die is to say, oh, I'm fine. It'll be okay. I'm not going to get that treatment. I'm not going to do what it takes. I'm not going under there and get that surgery. Well, that might hurt. I'm not taking that nasty medicine, and that radiation will make you glow in the dark. No, that doesn't work. You got to face up to it. We've got a huge problem. And let me tell you what, where's the money coming from? I'll tell you where it's coming from. It's coming from the prisons that we're not going to have to build. It's coming from the new courtrooms we're not going to have to build. It's coming from the salaries of the police officers that we're not going to have to hire, because these people that get educated, go out, get decent jobs, blue collar, white collar, administrative, librarian, you name it. These people are productive citizens and they're too busy living their lives and having a good time and enjoying everything that this country has to offer, instead of out there living in the streets, clogging up the criminal justice system and clogging up the prisons. So it's pay me now, pay me later. I promise you, it's going to take a huge investment to make those changes in public education now. And it may not show up for another 10, 15, 20 years, but I promise you, we're much better off in the long run to address these issues, spend the money now, see changes in the way we provide education and help provide a better culture for these kids. And they're not going to end up in that system.
Dr. Williams, we unfortunately are out of time. We could talk about this for a long time. I can tell that you're extremely passionate about this. We're going to close out this episode of Local Matters by thanking you so much for being willing to express your thoughts. It's obvious that you spent a lot of time thinking about this topic. And I just want to let you know how much we appreciate you being a part of our community and a concerned citizen in our community.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I hope that some folks hear this and call your Board of Education representatives and tell them to speak up, be heard, be part of the solution.